Good evening. I'm Rachel Person, Event Director for Northshire Bookstore, with store locations in Saratoga Springs, New York, and Manchester Center, Vermont. Thank you so much for your support of independent bookselling. We couldn't exist and put on great events like this one without the loyalty and support of customers like you. All of this evening's authors' books are available for purchase in both Northshire store locations and at northshire.com. After I finish this introduction, I'll drop a link in the chat where you can find all of their most recent books. Throughout the evening, please put any questions that you have into the chat. Our moderator will be asking them as we go through after a little bit of initial conversation, and then we'll be posing your questions for you. I'm delighted to get to be the one to welcome this group of mystery authors for what is sure to be a fascinating conversation on our screens this evening. Farrel Coleman is a New York Times bestselling author and has been called a hard-boiled poet by NPR's Maureen Corrigan and the Noir Poet Laureate in the Huffington Post. He's published more than 30 previous novels and has won 4 Shamus Awards, as well as winning the Anthony McCavity Berrien Audio Awards. His most recent book is Blind to Midnight. New York Times bestselling author Matt Goldman is a playwright and Emmy Award-winning television writer for Seinfeld, Ellen, and other shows. He brings his signature storytelling abilities and light touch to his Nils Shapiro series, which begins with Gone to Dust. His next novel, The Murder Show, is available for pre-order now. Charles Salzberg is the author of mysteries including the Shamus Award-nominated Swan's Last Song and Second Story Man, winner of the Beverly Hills Book Award. His novels have also been recognized by Suspense Magazine and the Silver Falchion Awards, and the Indie Excellence Award, and his most recent mystery is Man on the Run. He has also written more than 25 nonfiction books and is a founding member of the New York Writers Workshop. Tom Straw is an Emmy and Writers Guild of America nominated writer-producer, New York Times bestselling author, and former Mystery Writers of America board member. Writing as Richard Castle, Tom originated the hit Nikki Heat series, writing its first 7 novels, all New York Times bestsellers. Later, he published Buzzkiller and, most recently, The Accidental Joe, both under his own name. Michael Wiley now teaches literature at the University of North Florida in Jacksonville. He writes the Sam Kelson series and is the Shamus Award-winning author of the Chicago-based Joe Kosmarski PI series, the Daniel Turner and Frankie Dass series. His Frankie Dass thriller, Monument Road, was nominated for the Shamus Award. Please join me in welcoming them all to our screens this evening. And Reed, please take it away.
Happily. Welcome to our panel, better known as 5 old white guys with gray hair talking about books. We're all very good friends, and this will be as conversational as possible. I just want to say we welcome your questions, but give us about 10 minutes of discussion before you start asking the questions. If you need be, write them down for yourselves, and then I will integrate them into the discussion. But what we're here to discuss basically are the books that inspired us to either begin writing or that keep us writing or that make us completely jealous and make us want to quit writing. So I have a story. I'll go last, but let's start with Mike. Mike, what drove you to this insane profession?
I grew up in a household full of books and parents who were reading a book, basically at dinner and when they got up to breakfast and everything other times. But for me, I've always loved the mysteries. I've always loved the crime stories. And the ones that really got me going were the famous ones for so many of us, which were Raymond Chandler, The Big Sleep, and Farewell, My Lovely. These with the kind of voice that Philip Marlowe has, and the stories that get told so tightly, they made me want to be able to tell stories like them.
Charles?
Well, I grew up in a household of books too, but I was the only one who read them. So, so I didn't have much competition there. But I really fell in love with reading early, and I would read books that were probably not written for my age when I was reading them. I lived over a drugstore, and there was book racks, paperback books, and that was my library. I used to go down and look through them, and if I liked a cover, I would buy it. but I became a crime writer by accident. It was kind of a challenge. I had no, the writers that really inspired me were writers like Saul Bellow and Nabokov and Philip Roth and Norman Mailer, people like that. And so when I wrote the first one, what I learned from them was probably more important. And it wasn't that I didn't read mysteries. I read Chandler and Hammett, especially Hammett. So I was kind of inspired just by good literature and reading good literature.
Mr. Straw?
Yes. Oh, you want me to answer now?
Yes, yes.
Well, somewhere, and I don't have it because it's, faded and curled in a shoebox somewhere, but somewhere there's a photograph of me as a young teenager sitting on a sailboat reading Les Miserables. I'm sure it was the abridged edition because, I don't think I could have done it at that age. But I've always had a very big love of reading. That book by Victor Hugo is very formative for me. But, as you guys are saying, as I kind of grew up a little bit, I started getting enthralled by the mystery stories, the classics and all that. The one I'm here, I have a book too, Mike Wiley, so don't you be...
I've got a whole bookshelf with me.
Yeah, I know. Reed's going to just start throwing them. They're right behind
I think that was, by the way, because you couldn't see that, I think that was Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice.
How did you know? No, this is A Perfect Spy by John le Carré. And to me, I assume we're going to talk about contemporary ones soon enough, but to me, that is the book that I dip back into a lot for inspiration and for awe and for hatred of that man who could write so well, as Reed points out. Charles, you mentioned Philip Roth. He was on the Dick Cavett show in 1986, and he was talking about books. And he says, there's a book by John le Carré called A Perfect Spy, and it's not only a great thriller, and he said this is a very bold statement. He says, I think it's the best English book since World War II. So there have been a number of them since then, so we can talk about those. But I line up behind him.
Mr. Goldman?
I've always been a big reader, but not a big crime fiction reader until shortly before I started writing it. And I think the author who made me want to be an author is Kurt Vonnegut. Not for the science fiction. I'm not a science fiction person, but Slaughterhouse-Five is the first one I read, and there's a guy from the Midwest, to see that simple Midwest language without the heaviness of Hemingway. It was funny, and it was quirky, and it had a real emotional punch. So Vonnegut made me want to be a writer. Oddly enough, I ended up writing television for a long time before I ever wrote books. And the author who made me want to write crime fiction, like Mike, is Raymond Chandler. And the reason is I'd been developing a comedic voice for 25 years as first a stand-up comedian and then a TV writer. And when I read Chandler, I saw, Philip Marlowe is the narrator. He has a wry sense of humor, wonderful social observation, but he's telling a darker story. And I thought, well, I'm never going to be able to write as well as Chandler probably, but I can use my comedic voice to narrate a story. And that's what I did. I had a few months and I sat down and wrote one, and it changed my life. So, but Vonnegut and Chandler, since then, I'm with Tom. Le Carré has made a huge impact on me as well.
Don't think I haven't noticed that you've not mentioned me. Not one of you mentioned my books.
We were waiting for you to list us.
Yeah. Don't forget, I know where all you guys live. So just remember. For me, and I know you've all heard this before, is I always claim, you'll hear this a lot. Books can change your life. For me, that is, and usually it's meant in a subtle way. Books will change your life. For me, it changed my life completely. I was, like Matt, not a crime fiction reader. And the short version of this is I took a night class at Brooklyn College because it fit my schedule, and it was called American Detective Fiction. And I had never read crime fiction. To me, crime fiction were the cheesy books on my dad's nightstand with the half-naked women holding guns, with the lurid covers. So that never interested me. I read Vonnegut a lot, and I read a lot of philosophy and a lot of poetry. I took this class, American Detective Fiction, and the first three books we read were The Continental Op by Dashiell Hammett, The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett, and Farewell, My Lovely by Raymond Chandler. And this is the God's honest truth. I went home that night and asked my wife if it would be all right if I could quit my job, my good paying job at Kennedy Airport, where I went to France twice a year for free and had a company car, if I could quit that job to write detective novels. And it's obviously changed my life. And my wife bemoans saying yes to this day.
You know what's really interesting about the question, and I think about this afterwards, is most of the novels that for instance, you talked about Les Miserables. That's a crime novel.
It is.
Lolita is a crime novel. You don't get much lower than a pedophile who takes a young girl across state lines. Even with Saul Bellow, Seize the Day could be considered a crime novel because there's someone who is, he's a fraud and he's an embezzler. He's kind of a cut rate Madoff or something. So a lot of the novels that we've read over the years really could be considered crime novels. There's not that much of a difference to me.
Well,
Yeah,
I bet you Mike can tell you that almost all novels can be in some ways reduced to being crime novels.
No. They might rise to being crime novels.
Right.
I was going to make the same point that Charles was making. A book that I didn't mention that is at the core of everything I write is Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon, and it's a crime novel. Chandler is channeling Shakespeare. He's channeling Hamlet half the time. So yeah, it's all there.
Adam and Eve.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of Donna Tartt. A Secret History is a crime novel from page one.
Yes.
From page one. And I guess when they get thick enough and they have enough literary merit, they move out of the category.
Well, let me ask you the following questions, okay? Great Gatsby is a crime novel. How does Gatsby make his money? What are the two greatest revenge novels? Moby Dick and The Count of Monte Cristo. When you think about the most popular novels, crime novels or not, they can often rise to the level of crime novels.
I have a problem with that rising or falling kind of a thing. I think there's great writing and there's not so good writing, and to me, again, I'm gonna take away in a sense that differentiation between the crime and the not. There's good writing, and it's however the industry packages it, but a good novel is a good novel.
So we talked about the books that got us into this. Another fine mess you've gotten us into. Now let's talk about the books and the authors that we read currently and continue to inspire us and might recommend to the people watching this. So I started with Mike before. Let me go spin the wheel. Tom, I know you just talked about Le Carré, but there are others.
Yeah, well, the one I want to talk about is what I see as the heir to Le Carré, and that is Mick Herron. And by the way, I keep getting a notice that I have an unstable internet connection, which is nothing personal. Just I dropped it there. But to me, I just absolutely fell in love with Slow Horses when I read it. To me, it has all of the tension and thrills and the sort of reality feeling that you get from a Le Carré novel. Tighter, of course, but also mixed with this black humor, this dark humor, these great characters who, are so, Jackson Lamb is like one of the great characters, I think, in literature right now, and on television, as it turns out. But I think what Heron succeeded in doing with his Slow Horses series of books is exactly what Le Carre did, which is that coming at it from a different angle, which is humor, he has humanized the workplace. He has made us care for these people so much. And what I love, just as in A Perfect Spy, how Magnus Pym grew up in a really dysfunctional household, with a con man father that prepared him so well to be a perfect spy with all the duplicity. What McHarren has done with the Slow Horses, he's taken these would-be losers working at Slow House, and they are succeeding not because it isn't their flaws that are holding them back. They're succeeding because of them, and I think that's ingenious.
Charles?
Well, and I'm not just flattering you guys because I came to this rather late writing crime. I read all you guys, all your books, and so it's hard for me to pick one. But right now, what I do when I'm reading something, for instance, we had a lunch yesterday with people that I've known, but I haven't read some of their work. So I'll go out and get their work and read it, and I learn something from reading every single crime novel and non-crime novel too. I mean, not just Matt does, I kid him about it, but he does family secret stuff really well. He does family, and I don't write that, maybe because I had such a fractured family, but I really learned from that how to construct a book. And so right now I'm reading more. I don't have favorites in the genre that I read, other than anything that looks interesting to me. Or we have a bi-weekly Zoom. If one of you guys mentions a book that you've read recently, I'll order it right there, on my phone to read it. So it's hard for me to choose, a couple of authors. But for instance, I'll go back and I'll read In Cold Blood and The Executioner's Song over and over again. Because they're so good, and they cross that line between fiction and nonfiction.
Mike?
Like Charles, I will recommend all the books that the four of you have written. That continues to feed me in so many ways. Partly because we're all crime writers, but we take a good number of different approaches to crime, and so Tom, your mention of Le Carre and McHarren, in your most recent and Accidental Joe, you work the spy thriller in just beautifully. And again, we cross all kinds of grounds there. The two writers, who I think of, who I'll mention right now, and they've been around for a long time, but I'll say that over the years, to this day, they continue to sustain me. One is Don Winslow. And again, he's a guy who has extraordinary range. Whether we're looking at his Cartel trilogy, the book that I always think is the best of those is the first of them, which is The Power of the Dog, or sometimes the ones that aren't maybe as recognized as some of his other ones, like The Winter of Frankie Machine. Terrific books by Winslow. And again, like Charles, I learn every time I read these writers. The other one I'll mention is James Lee Burke, and I mostly like the work that he was writing, say 20 years ago, but the most recent one that he wrote that I think is terrific is The Glass Rainbow. That's been out for a good number of years, but again, it's just a powerful piece of writing. He's not somebody one should necessarily ever try to imitate. If you do, you're going to fall into a deep hole. He's not imitable, but boy, can you learn something about how to tell a story and draw emotion and evoke a place. Nobody can do it like Burke.
He'll send Cleet after you.
Yeah, or Dave Robichaux, either one. Yeah. I don't want either.
Matt?
Current writers that I can't wait for their next book to come out. Tana French I really like her writing. I love Ireland, even though I'm not Irish at all. I like books set there. I like the Dublin series, but I really love her newer series, The Searcher and the Hunter. Takes place in a tiny town in Ireland. Um, she really does character well. And for what I love to read and what I love to write is character more than anything else. For that same reason, I really like Kate Atkinson, a British writer. Sometimes the crime part of her books get a little, there's a little too much coincidence in them, but the character and the humor is great. And Lou Burney, I'm always ready to read the next Lou Burney book. And of course, you guys too. I read all your books. Um, I feel honored to be in the same Zoom with you every couple of weeks, and I learn from you. It's it there's a lot of good work out there. It's hard to keep up with it all, and I'll go back and read something old. Like I just read Legends of the Fall for the first time. There's a lot of crime in that, a whole lot of crime in it. And it's I guess I feel great that there's this constant, almost unending well of great things to read out there. Yeah.
So,
How about you,
okay,
Reed?
I'm just gonna, yeah, here's a question. And I wanted to tell everybody, I'm gonna answer, but I want you to let you know you can start asking questions, folks. Um,
Can I hop in with just one comment though?
sure, go ahead, Tom.
Because I steered away from you guys because I thought we were gonna, talk about other writers. But I think one of the things, we've been doing this since the pandemic started, these Zooms every 2 weeks. And I think one of the things that's great about it is not just that we all kind of get along and we all like each other and we have some laughs and all that. No punches are ever thrown. But I know this is my feeling. I respect the writing of you guys so much. And not just that it's great writing, but I see different colors every time. And it's almost like, well, hell, this is his best book. No, the one before that. No, this is the better. You know what I mean? There is so much to enjoy and so many different angles that you come upon the same material. It's very humbling, and I think that mutual respect, I think, is one of the things that carries us.
Yeah, and I think it shows up here. By the way, let me say to the people, put your questions in the chat box, not in the question box, because we are not seeing that. So put your questions in the chat box. Marjorie Tucker, by the way, says hello to everybody.
Hey, Marjorie.
Uh, for me, books that inspire me that I'm reading now. I mean, I love Michael Connelly. What I love about Michael Connelly is he's pretty straightforward in his storytelling. He's journalistic, but his characters are wonderful. I think if you polled all of us here tonight, we would all say character is the thing first. It's the first thing. If you don't care about the character, it's hard for me to worry about the plot, to be invested.
And people remember characters and fall in love with characters, not plots.
Yeah. So I like Michael Connelly. I loved the late Philip Kerr, the Bernie Gunther series. And I've had the good fortune to meet both Michael and I knew Philip a little. He was one of the most interesting people I ever met. And I go back and read Berlin Noir occasionally, every few years. Great, great detective novels. Um, I'm also a huge fan of Daniel Woodrell. If you've ever seen the movie Winter's Bone, um, he writes these 200-page books that are so full that you'd swear the book's 500 pages. But it's the Winter's Bone as a book was about 200 pages, and it was certainly like reading the Odyssey within 10 miles of a girl's house in the Ozarks.
Yeah, and if you want even shorter, Tomato Red is about 100 pages long and feels, again, just as thick.
Yeah. So Charles, did you see that? Helene from Australia just
Yes.
said
Helen. Hi,
yeah.
Helen.
Yeah. Okay. Now here's one. we talked about books that inspired us, book that we like reading now, and also I have to say this, guys, I truly love and respect all of you. Your books, no.
I knew there was a but coming.
And it is true that if we didn't like each other's work, I'm not sure that our Zoom calls would have lasted, would have sustained.
Talk about awkwardness.
Yeah. And our books we write very differently than
Yeah,
we do.
And that also, I'd say Mike and I write the closest to each other, but it is great to respect everybody and like them as people. Okay, so here's one. What do you think is the most difficult
part of writing a book, and how do you do it? Or something.
Right.
Getting myself to sit down in front of the computer is the hardest part.
Okay, Matt?
I think the most difficult part is when you're in a good place with your story. You know what the next good place is. You don't know how to get there. I call them bridge scenes or bridge chapters, and they're necessary. That you need to find this way to get from one point to the other in a natural way that's not boring, that in which your characters have a big part to do with it. They're proactive, and those can be the hardest parts. There's you have this great thing coming. You can't wait to get there. You just don't know how to get there.
I'm going to jump in here and say, Matt, you stole my answer. because
Well, then you shouldn't have asked the question.
I didn't ask the question.
Oh yeah, somebody else did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The point is you have to get from A to C.
Yeah.
And B just doesn't work somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I solve the problem the same way every time. And my son goes nuts because he goes, "You've written 30 books and you only call up and complain to me about bridge scenes. And you
Right.
solve it the same way every time." But for me, like Matt, it's bridge scenes. Mike?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've talked about overall, and I think that we're all, the five of us are fortunate, is that for the most part, while we face impediments, we face these difficult kinds of times. For the most part, I think we mostly don't face writer's block, or we don't get in the way of ourselves as far as that goes. The part that it's a really interesting question, because the thing that I keep on coming back to is that I fall in love with my characters, and those characters, and whether it's the hero or the most evil character there, I see something redeeming in them. And so sometimes I forget that these characters need to win over others as well, because it's like I know that they're okay. There's the famous line, about villains that if they're not, likable enough, you have them pat a dog, to let everybody know that they're really kind of human. I sometimes don't, they might want to strangle the dog. I mean, I don't ever have them do that, but there's still that element in which it's like, no, these are the interesting ones to me. And so sometimes remembering to show the good side, I have to keep reminding myself to do that.
I just wanted to add two quick ones. I have the most problems with action scenes and love scenes, so I just don't do them.
I have very active love scenes. So
I have actually a wider view and then a very specific one. The wider view first is that after writing, and having published 10 or 11 novels, which I know is nothing compared to what you guys have put out, the difficult part is that everyone is difficult. You have a learning curve, you have craft, kind of what works and kind of what doesn't, you have experience, but every book is hard, in a good way. Every book has its difficulties. And so that if you ask what's difficult, I'd say writing the book. Specifically, I would say I need to keep reminding myself that whatever horrible garbage this may seem to be, I can fix it on the rewrite. Matt and I both came out of television. And so we tend not to get hung up because we always had that deadline. Every morning at 10 o'clock, the actors are going to come in and they're going to need to read a script. For me, it's that just keep charging, just keep writing, even if it's crap. I fixed enough other people's writing when I was in television doing rewrites. I can fix my own. And that's what I have to cling to. And it's
Okay,
hard.
Matt, we have a question specifically for Matt.
Yes.
Do you see it, Matt?
Mhm.
Okay, I'll read it to you. Matt, it
Okay.
sounds as if you, the author, might be leading the story rather than letting the stakes and journey of the characters do that work. How do you negotiate this tendency?
I don't do that. I do the opposite of that. I don't outline. I start with a notion. I get to know my characters on the page as they go when they're up and walking and talking. I have no idea where the story's going. Once I get into it for a while, I know, oh, this thing I know can happen. So, but I don't have the bridge to it. So I I could talk about this for
Right.
way too long.
Okay.
I hate structure. I think it's absolute BS. I do not create an outline because if you do, then you have these characters who are supposed to follow it. And if they are characters who feel like real people, if they're three-dimensional, if they behave consistently within themselves, it's really hard to hammer them into a pre-made story. I absolutely, it's what I feel most strongly about. Never leave those characters.
Yeah, what he said.
Yeah.
Matt Goldman, you're dead to me.
Yes.
Oh,
Guys,
yeah.
yeah, Leslie has a question for us all, and I'm going to start with Mike. What's your favorite book of your own, and can you pick one? Do you have difficulty?
I write in a couple of different spaces. I write. I've got two short series of PI novels that are set in the Midwest in Chicago, where I grew up, and then I write something that really tends much more to the Southern Gothic, which I set in the southeastern United States, and they feel very, very different. And so, in some senses, I feel like I'm split on this. In the Midwestern series and the PI, I do think that I would say either Head Case, which is a Sam Kelson book, the third in the series, or maybe A Bad Night's Sleep, which is the one that won the Seamus Award, and that's in a Joe Kosmarski series. The book that I'm most proud of that is set in the Southeast, the Southern Gothic, is Monument Road, which is the one that I have, that we're talking about. It's actually not my most recent book, but it's the book that I think does the most.
Charles?
It is hard because I try to make each book different, but probably my favorite is Second Story Man. And the reason is because the challenge of writing one of the main characters is not a nice person or a good person, or he's pretty evil, actually.
In other words, it's autobiographical, right?
Exactly. I drew upon myself. And so to make that character compelling was a challenge. And it turned out, I think it worked out because Man on the Run is kind of I don't call it a sequel, I call it a continuation because it's got the same character in it. So probably that, even though I have a real fondness for the Swan books, because that's what got me into this accidentally in the first place.
Matt?
I answer this question differently every year. It's my newest book.
Right.
And the reason I say that is because I feel like if I'm not getting better every book, it's time to hang it up. So this is my new favorite book, The Murder Show, that comes out in April.
Yeah,
But certainly I have.
And
I've read it, and it's quite good. I have read it.
Oh, thank you.
It's great.
Thank you. Obviously, my first book, Gone to Dust, has a special place for me, and my first standalone, Carolina Moonset, where I wrote my father's voice when he was suffering from Lewy body dementia. is also special to me. But yeah.
Tom?
Well, a lot like Matt, if a year ago I would have answered Heat Rises in my Nikki Heat Castle book, which was the third one in the 7 I wrote. And first of all, I liked the book very much in hindsight. And it also went to #1 in the New York Times. So that's something that you just kind of like say to yourself, well, that's something that you cling to. But much like Matt and maybe you others, my newest one speaks to me. I love the character, the chef who is finding himself in the middle of the spy game, and so The Accidental Joe would be my choice.
And for me, I've written 5 or 6 different series. So I would, if I had to pick the book I think is my best, I would pick this book. It's called Where It Hurts. It's in the Gus Murphy series. It won the Shamus Award and was nominated for an Edgar Award and a Thriller Award, which means I lost those other 2. And like the rest of us, I'm also loving the book I'm writing now. So, and if somehow you don't love the book you're writing currently, then maybe it's time to take a rest or not do it for a while. You should
years
love.
and years ago, I interviewed a bunch of writers for a New York Times essay on how they feel when they finish a book. And I called up Stanley Elkin and I asked him, and he said, when I finish a book, I feel like I've invented the English language. And a week later, I think it's the biggest piece of crap I've ever seen. And that's the way you go. I'm sure all of us, we go through, oh, this is really great. And then,
Yes.
oh, God, this is horrible.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say I was at a Writers Guild retreat at Lake Arrowhead, and Harlan Ellison was there. And we got into conversation after his presentation. We sort of hung out and had a drink and all that. And he said to me something I won't forget, because we talked about what do you do when you feel like you're not going anywhere with the piece you're working on. And he said, well, you keep going. And then he looked at me and he said, but sometimes the book is telling you something. And I think that's hard to say, set it aside for a while, or maybe this isn't for me, but sometimes you do have to take a gap and refresh.
Yeah, Cheryl, could you do me a favor? Cheryl's one of the audience. She put a comment down that's disappeared, and it was something.
I know, I see it. It drives me crazy when readers say, I didn't like the characters. I love a book with characters you love to hate. For example, Yellowface by R.F. Sherrill in Houston.
Why don't you try our books? Because not only can you hate the characters, you can hate us.
Yeah, we're good. So
yeah, we're good for that. Another question, guys. We've talked about a lot of famous writers, old and new. But I like talking about, we all know people who should be read more, including us, but we know people who should be read more. And how about 1 or 2 recommendations of people who we think readers should read and aren't read enough? Mike, you look like you want to start.
Well, I'm going to mention a writer who does get a lot of people reading, but I don't think a lot of people who are necessarily, say, crime readers or people who read a lot of mysteries read as much as otherwise. And he's got a big name, but I still think that deserves a bigger name, and that's Louis Bayard. Louis Bayard he does very, very well. He had his Pale Blue Eye was made into a Netflix movie that was the #1 global one. So maybe I'm answering this question wrong. But I just read The Dark Tower or The Black Tower by him, which is a mystery that's set in French Revolutionary period. Not something I normally would read. This guy can write. He can write like very few other people can. And so I picked up his new novel, which is not at all a crime novel. And in many ways, I was thinking, all right, I'm not sure what I'm going to think of it. That's The Wilds, and it's about Oscar Wilde, and it's really written with the perspective of Oscar Wilde's wife, Constance. Not only is it funny, not only is it gripping, but it's some of the most emotionally powerful reading that I've done in years. So
Lou, I know
Lou Bayard,
like,
Bayard.
yeah,
He's
I've
terrific.
known Lou for a long time, and
So have I.
I
So have I.
second that emotion. I second that. I second that motion. And he is one of the funniest human beings I have ever met.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, he gives Oscar Wilde a run for the money.
Yes, Charles.
Well, I was really lucky to get into this group because I say Mike and Reed have been probably doing this the longest. And whenever they'll mention a writer like that, I will ask them what they think of that writer. Do they think it's good? And I will then get the book, and I will get the book that you just mentioned. One year I volunteered to be a judge for the Edgar, and I got close to 600 hardcovers. Books, but it was a great experience because I was able to, I'm not saying that I read every single one through, that for sure, but I was able to find some authors that I didn't know of and that you guys probably do. And one of them I found was a fellow by the name of David Joy, and I really enjoyed his work, and I don't think I would ever have, because he doesn't go to the conferences that I know of. And he's not a bestseller, and I don't know if I would have found him if I hadn't been a judge for the Edgars.
Yeah, I've actually blurbed his first book, I think.
Did you?
Southern Gothic.
Yeah.
He's kind of Southern Gothic writer. Really interesting guy too. Matt?
Boy, I don't even know where to start. I'm in Minnesota, so I'm going to mention some Minnesota writers that people may or may not have heard of. Alan Eskins is an excellent writer, and I think he should get more attention on a national level. Marcy Rendon is a wonderful writer. Most people may have heard of William Kent Kruger, Jess Lowry. These are my local people here who all are published on nationally, but bookstores and lists in well-known publications tend to feature the big writers, and there are a lot of wonderful writers who, for one reason or another, have just not broken through to be not a household name, but a household name in a house full of readers. So those are just a few I would mention. Also, Barbara Nicholas is a wonderful writer, and she's now starting to write some espionage fiction. There's great writers out there. Yeah.
Tom?
Well, I'm in Connecticut, and I would like to speak for a New England author who doesn't get enough attention. His name is Mr. Stephen King. He could use a little boost, I think, and I'd be happy to give that. But actually, there is somebody I enjoy his. I've read a lot of his books. I would say I read as many of his books as I've read of your guys, or how. Okay, there goes my grammar.
Use guys. We can.
Or you guys is
but I mentioned
you guys
Stephen
is.
King. But his name is Linwood Barkley. He's lives in Toronto. He's a Canadian author, and I think he should be read more. His last two books have been enthusiastically blurbed by Stephen King, which is no small thing. He writes thrillers that are very good conceptually, and really talk about character. They really pull you along, and you care.
So I'm going to mention one person because we all know tons of people. We actually could go on and on and on, but I have been a champion of Peter Spiegelman for a long time. Peter Spiegelman he's written about 8 books, I'd say. He's not doesn't write quickly, doesn't put a lot of books out, but to me, and I've won 4 Shamus Awards for Best PI Novel of the Year. Mike's won one, and the rest of us, I think, have been
I've lost
nominated.
2.
I've lost 3.
Yeah, Tom will get there. He'll wear the L someday soon.
Yeah.
He wrote a book called Red Cat, which I count amongst the best private eye novels I've ever read. He's written a series also featuring a doctor in LA called Dr. Knox. I would highly, highly recommend reading Peter Spiegelman.
And he's a nice guy.
He's a great guy, and he
He's a
is
very nice guy.
a great writer who should be read more. I think Rachel's on. Rachel, should we ask the last question?
We are
Last
running low on
question
time. We have time for one more.
Okay.
Was what advice, someone asked it, what advice would you have for a nascent writer, a new writer, or someone who aspires to do this? Let's start, Charles. Why don't you start?
Read a lot and get your ass down in the seat and start writing.
You know,
Matt?
Charles, I know that you teach creative writing. I teach creative writing. I've done so for years as well. And I'm gonna reiterate what you just said. Read, and not only read it, but figure out the books that you really love and the ones that are in the genre that you like most. Not only read it, but then reread it, and then read it again with a pen and post-it notes, and mark it up. Have a clean copy if you want it, but mark it up and make notes about how did this writer do what this writer did at a certain moment. Not to imitate it, but just to appreciate the craft that goes into it. And then, as Charles said, sit down and write and write. There's not a single path, but there are thousands of paths.
I have two quick answers to that. One is I'll just steal whoever said this. You can't rewrite a blank page. You've got to get something down on paper or on your screen, whatever, and then work with it. That's the most important thing. The other thing, and again, read. I would go to Northshire bookstore or to go online to the website and just find some books that would kind of inspire you.
Matt?
Be kind to yourself. It's hard to start with a blank page, and everybody's first drafts stink. Everybody's. Your favorite writer, their first draft stinks. So get something down on paper. It's a butt in the chair job. And if the next day when you read it over, it's terrible, that's okay. Make it a little better and just keep doing that. It's like exercise. You got to start slow. And even when you get going, you have setbacks. But just stick with it and don't beat yourself up, because everyone goes through it. It's hard.
And I would say there's no such thing as wasted writing. So as much as you can write, every time you write, even if that day's work is not to your liking, believe me, it'll make you a better writer. So write as much as you can.
That is all really great advice and a lovely note to end on, I think, this evening. So thank you so much to our amazing panelists for taking the time to be with us this evening. Thank you, audience. And you can find books by all of these great authors and more upcoming Northshire events at northshire.com.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel.
And thank everyone who Zoomed with us.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming in and
Thank you.
spending some time with us.
Have
Good
a
night.
great night, everybody.
Good night.